when we first went to meet Robert Downey Sr., I was surprised at how, his sister calls him an innocent in the film. And I actually think that's like a quite appropriate word to use for him when you get to know him. But from looking at his work, I just thought he would be much more acerbic in a way, just because there's such a bite to a lot of the work that he's done. The meta nature of the film was definitely something that evolved over time. It wasn't something that we went in with, but as we got to know Senior and sort of just understood his influence on the project, it became apparent that this could evolve into something else. I remember there was an interview clip that didn't end up making the final cut, but where Robert was, talking about like understanding your father, but he also was like, hopefully people get to know someone they might not have known, and I thought that was like such a nice way to say it. And I think that one of the things that's so nice about documentaries is just that for everyone it's different, but they're reflective of you and your own life and your own life experience, and that there's things you can take away from them that inform the way that you think. What I like about a film like this is that it opens the door for those that are interested can go and actually watch the movies themselves, which I think would be the best way to experience them as opposed to the clips that we have in here. But, aside from that, it's like, I think for us, we were more interested in the person than the movies. And that's, it was an interesting journey to realize that there was so much in the movies that when you looked at the movies against the journey that he went on in life, is that each one was informing each period of time. And so that's kind of ended up informing the structure of the film. The first day that we started filming was with Robert and his dad in the Hamptons, and I remember very clearly we got a message from Emily, who works in their office, was like, you can't bring any crew. And I hadn't picked up a camera in 10 years. It was unnerving in the sense of like, that we had to go, and I didn't know how to operate a camera anymore. And so I was trying to learn that. And then when we get there, the first thing Robert said to us was, there's nothing off limits, and that was it. And that kind of was like the guiding thing through the entire film, is that there was nothing that was off limits. There was nothing we couldn't talk about. There was nothing we couldn't explore. And so I think that, that's very much reflected in the movie. Well, there were two cameramen. I was shooting part of it and Kevin was shooting part of it. So we did different parts, but Kevin is like almost part of the family. And so I think that, it was sort of seamless in terms of the way that he was able to integrate into some of the really more intimate moments. And so it was a dance between the two of us. The decision to do black and white happened very early. It was one of those things that just felt very instinctual, but at the same time, one of the things that Senior always talked about was like trying to do things differently and trying to challenge yourself to do things differently. And I think in that process, it was a mirror to what we were doing. And it was like, oh, well, how can we reflect that? And one of the ideas was like, oh, why don't we just try doing this in black and white, which is something I had never done before. There's scenes where Robert and his dad are having these video conversations, and that was obviously born out of the pandemic. Robert had this intention to go talk to his father and have these like conversations about his life. And when COVID hit and they were, Robert was stuck in Los Angeles and his dad was in New York, the idea was to get these little Zoom cameras, which we placed one in Robert's house and one in his father. And so they ended up doing the conversations through that. Part of the idea of the Zoom calls was that Robert planned to come and have this final conversation, or a conversation with his father. And Zoom calls, were part of that process, but I think he really did, still wanted that to happen. And so him going there to sort of have this conversation with his father was an extension of that. But as you can see in the film, it just sort of was too late. When the film was finished, we showed it to Paul, and we ended up, I think, having an hour-and-a-half Zoom call with Robert and Susan and Paul and I. And I think that was the one audience response that was probably the most valuable, was that he was supportive of the film. That he didn't feel like it was a betrayal to what you would hope in a documentary about Senior. I remember when we first got it done, I talked to Eugene every year for the last 3 years about this film, coming here with this, I always get deluded thinking that things are going to go quicker than they are. But I had been tracking this with him for the last 3 years, so we were super excited that they saw in the film what we hoped they would see and that they programmed it. With every movie, you work in a vacuum to some degree, and I think, to be able to experience it with the theater of any movie I've made, it's just I think there's such universality in terms of the experience that Robert goes through and the openness that they, shared with the camera, something that is so universal in the way that we, deal with our parents and our lives and life in general. The first film I had on Netflix was called Jim and Andy, about Jim Carrey playing Andy Kaufman in Man on the Moon. And as somebody who had made independent movies for 15 years that went to Sundance, and half the time we put them in theaters ourselves and had in the thousands of people see them, to go to something so on such another level, and also that Netflix itself has cultivated an audience that has an appreciation for documentaries, has been such artistically such a different experience, because you went from something that was, the festival was the experience, and now it lives beyond you in this way that was nothing that I ever could conceive as a documentary filmmaker. There was something just about spending time with him that was so life-affirming, just in the way that he looked at things so differently than anyone else. And I think that's something in general that I've always been attracted to, are just people that kind of march to the beat of their own drum, and that they sort of see the world differently. And I thought he definitely fit within that. One of the things I like about documentaries, when you go into it, you don't know what it will be, or at least those are the ones that I'm most excited about. And I think this was that, many multiples of anything else I had done before, where we went into it with an open mind in terms of, just meeting Senior and just sort of starting this process, but then it quickly took many left turns, as you can see when you see the film. For me, it's always trying to capture the essence of what it is you're trying to film. And so, I don't feel like I'm always trying to put my stamp on things. For me, it's really just about trying to react to the environment that I'm immersed in, and portray that in the most honest way possible.